I am a wilderness ranger with 12 years in the Manistee District. Before that, 2 years with the Superior National Forest and a biology degree from Michigan State. I write field reports in the passive voice because passive voice is how you keep your own interpretation out of the data. I have encountered black bears in close quarters on 4 occasions and handled each of them correctly. I have found human remains twice, both drowning victims, both retrieved, both documented completely and without incident. I do not rattle easily. I know the difference between what I observed and what I interpreted, and I hold that line because the line is the job. My marriage ended 2 years before this account. Not badly, just finished the way some things finish. I took the extended patrol assignments because they kept me in the field, and the field kept me from the apartment in Cadillac, where the silence had a texture I wasn't ready to sit in. I am telling you this so you understand the state of mind I brought to Bear Creek on September 14th. Clear, focused, not distracted, not fragile, not looking for anything I didn't find. I went into the Bear Creek unit for a 3-day invasive species survey. Garlic mustard and phragmites documentation along the corridor, standard late-season work before the canopy drop made the transects unusable. I knew that country. I had walked it in every season and every light condition it produces, and the thing I knew about it most completely was its sound profile. The Pere Marquette corridor in September runs at a constant low frequency. Water over gravel, wind through the red osier dogwood and the button bush at the bank margins, the tufted titmice and red-breasted nuthatches working the oak canopy above the floodplain. That sound profile was as familiar to me as the sound of my own breathing. On the first day, nothing. On the morning of the second day, nothing. The garlic mustard stands mapped exactly where my previous survey had placed them. The phragmites' encroachment along the channel edge was progressing at the expected rate. I was halfway through the second day's transect when the corridor went quiet. Not gradually, not the way a forest goes quiet when a hawk passes through and the small birds press into cover. A switch. One moment, full ambient sound. Next moment, nothing. Not reduced. Nothing. The water sound was still there because water doesn't choose to be quiet, but everything biological had cut simultaneously, and I was standing in a corridor that had been full of life 30 seconds earlier and was now, in the truest sense of the word, empty. I stood still. I have been trained to respond to unusual field conditions with observation before action, and I stood still and I cataloged what I was receiving. No titmice, no nuthatches, no squirrel movement in the oak canopy. And there had been squirrel movement constant, because September is pre-cache season and the squirrels work without pause. No crows, no jays. The blue jays in that corridor were a constant presence, territorial and loud, and they were gone so completely it was as if they had never been there. The absence had a temperature. That is the most accurate way I can put it, and I know how it sounds. But I am telling you what I recorded in my notebook at 14:07 on September 15th. Ambient temperature, 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Perceived thermal displacement. Warmth without source. South quadrant. 15 meters approximate. I wrote it down because writing down what you observe is what you do, and what I was observing was a pocket of warm air in a river corridor on a 58-degree afternoon that had no thermal source to generate it. I checked my thermometer. 63 degrees at chest height on a north-facing bank at 2 in the afternoon with full cloud cover. The warmth I was perceiving was not ambient air temperature. It was emanating from a specific quadrant, and it smelled like something. The smell arrived with the warmth. Wet fur. The deep, close smell of a large canid that has been working, not resting. The metabolic heat of active muscle mass in dense coat. Underneath that, something mineral. Cave air without the cave. The cold stone undertone of a place that holds cold as a structural property, not as a weather condition. And under both of those, something I did not have a reference category for in 12 years of fieldwork. Something with an animal sweetness to it, the sweetness of large glands, of a body chemistry operating at a scale my olfactory system had no prior calibration for. I did not move. I was standing in 4-foot button bush on the inside bend of a meander, with my clipboard in my left hand and my radio in my right. And I did not move because the correct response to an unclassified threat is to remain still and gather data. And that is what I was doing, and I am proud of that. And also, I want to be honest. I was not moving because part of my nervous system had decided, ahead of the rational part, that moving was not an option it was willing to authorize. The tracks were in the sandbar on the inside of the bend, 3 meters from where I was standing, and I found them after. I will get to the tracks. What happened between the smell and the tracks is what I need to tell you first. The sound came from the west bank, the far bank, across 30 meters of low September water. It started below hearing. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but it isn't. There was a pressure in my chest before there was a sound in my ears, the way a subwoofer registers in your sternum before your auditory system catches up. That pressure built for 3 seconds, and then the sound arrived. And the sound was a vocalization. And the vocalization was coming from something that was using its chest cavity as an instrument. I have heard wolves twice in my career, once in Superior, once on a transfer survey to the Upper Peninsula. I know the fundamental frequency of a gray wolf howl, which sits between 150 and 780 hertz, depending on the individual and the vocalization type. What I was hearing was below that, significantly below that. The sound occupied the air the way no animal sound I had previously encountered occupies air, not by being louder than other sounds, but by being the only thing the air contained. It ran for what my watch later confirmed was 17 seconds. 17 seconds of continuous vocalization that built in the last 4 seconds to a volume that I felt in my back teeth and the small bones behind my ears. Then it cut, not faded, cut. And the silence after it was different from the silence before it, the way the air after a lightning strike is different from the air before. Ionized, changed, carrying the memory of what passed through it. I was looking at the west bank when it stopped. The west bank of the Bear Creek corridor at that location is 10-foot red osier dogwood and tag alder at the water margin. Behind it, a 30-foot setback of silver maple and cottonwood. Behind that, the first red oaks of the upland. The dogwood is impenetrable to visual scan past 3 meters under full leaf. I was looking at a wall of red dogwood stem and late-season leaf, and I was looking at it because something on the other side of it had just made a sound that my entire nervous system was oriented toward. It stepped out of the dogwood at the water margin. I am going to tell you what I saw, and I am going to use the words I wrote in my field notebook that afternoon, because I made myself write it down before I left that sandbar, because I knew then that if I didn't write it immediately, I would spend the rest of my life arguing with my own memory about it. Bipedal, stationary at waterline, east-facing. Height estimate from waterline comparison, 8 feet 2 inches to 8 feet 4 inches, confirmed against known cottonwood at 12 meters distance. Cottonwood crown break at 9 feet 3 inches on survey record. Subject's crown at sightline below that break. Build, not lean, dense. The volume of mass inconsistent with bipedal posture at that scale. The body's silhouette suggested structural redundancy. Mass distributed for four-limb locomotion, now organized vertically. Canid skull. Correct proportion to the body. That is the problem. A skull that large on a body that size makes anatomical sense, and biological sense should not allow it to. What happened to my body during the time I was observing this, I can describe clinically, because the clinical description is what I have, and I am giving you everything I have. My vision narrowed. The peripheral field, the dogwood to my left, and the water to my right, and the clipboard in my left hand, went gray, and then went away, and what remained was a tunnel, sharp and overlit seeming, with the figure at the waterline at its center. Tunnel vision as a physiological stress response is well documented. What I was experiencing was textbook. My jaw was clenched to the point where I felt the pressure in my temporomandibular joint and could not voluntarily release it. My stomach dropped. Not the dropped stomach feeling of a near-miss accident, which I have felt, but a deep, sustained downward pressure in the abdomen. The body's circulatory system redirecting blood to large muscle groups for locomotion. The digestive system deprioritized. My hands were steady. I noticed that specifically. 12 years of controlled responses in the field, and my hands were steady, and everything else was coming apart. It was looking at me. The eyes were the problem. Amber yellow, self-luminous, not reflective in the way an animal's eyeshine is reflective. Not the retro-reflection of a tapetum lucidum catching my headlamp, because I had no headlamp deployed, because it was 2:14 in the afternoon with a 40% cloud cover sky, producing approximately 8,000 lux of diffuse ambient light, which is not the condition under which eyes produce eyeshine. In full ambient afternoon light across 30 meters of open water, those eyes were producing their own light. I wrote it down. Eyes, self-luminous, amber yellow, no reflective source, full afternoon ambient. I knew when I wrote it that it would be the most contested detail in any account I gave. I wrote it anyway because it was true. It watched me for what my watch confirmed was 41 seconds. I know it was 41 seconds because I counted, because counting is something to do with the part of your brain that needed to be doing something that was not screaming. Then it went to 4 legs. The transition was, I want to find the word for the transition, and the word that keeps arriving is correct. Like watching a mechanism do what it was built to do. No awkwardness, no negotiation with gravity, no moment where the mass was in an intermediate position that looked unstable. It went from fully upright to 4-limb stance in one continuous motion, and it was across the 30 meters of the Bear Creek Channel and into the tag alder on my bank, in the time it took me to understand what I was watching. I heard it in the alder for 3 seconds, then I heard nothing. The tag alder stand I am referring to was approximately 9 meters to my north. Tag alder, Alnus incana, in September full leaf condition, stems averaging 2 inches diameter, stand depth approximately 8 meters before the silver maple setback. Something with a mass, I estimate, at 300 kilograms plus, moved through that stand in under 3 seconds and produced 3 seconds of sound, and then silence. And the silence was the silence of something that was no longer moving, not the silence of something that had exited the far margin of the stand and continued into the upland. I walked to my truck. I will not pretend there was a protocol I was executing. I chose the direction that contained my truck, and I moved in that direction, and I did not turn around. The tracks were in the sandbar where it had stood. I measured them before I left because I was not going to leave without documentation. 16.5 inches, heel to the terminus of the center digit impression. My own boot measured at the same time, 10.75 inches. The stride in the sand from the water margin to the first alder stems measured 73 inches. I measured it 3 times, 73 inches. Walking pace. A tall man running hard in soft sand covers 55 to 60 inches per stride. This was walking. The heel depression in the sand was 3/4 of an inch deep. My own heel depression in the same sand, stepping normally, 1/8 inch. I weigh 162 pounds. I have done the math that the depth differential implies, and I have declined to write it in any official report because the number it produces is one I cannot defend in a professional context. There is a man named Gerald Marchand who runs a bait shop on the Manistee River Road. He's been in the county his whole life, 60-something years, and he knows the country the way people know things they were born into. When I came out and stopped for gas, and he looked at my face, he asked me where I'd been working. I told him. He nodded the way people nod when they already know the end of what you're about to say. He said his father had a name for the Bear Creek drainage. He said the name didn't translate well from French Canadian, the family having come down from Quebec 3 generations back, but that the closest English equivalent was something like the thing that knows the river. He said his father never went into that drainage alone after October. Never explained why. Just said, "Give it the bottom of the drainage. Take the ridge." I asked Gerald if he'd seen it. He said, "Enough times to stop counting." He said it the way Dario said often in that other ranger's account. The way operational knowledge sounds when it's been carried long enough to stop being extraordinary and start being just the shape of the country you work in. I have been back to the Bear Creek unit 4 times since September 15th. I do not work the bottom of the drainage alone. I don't explain why to the seasonal rangers I take with me. I just say the terrain is more technical than it looks and a partner is the correct call. The terrain is not more technical than it looks. That is not the correct call, but it gets us both out every time, and that is what matters. And some knowledge you carry in your practice without being able to put it in the protocol. And the practice is what keeps people alive. And keeping people alive is the job. I check my measurements 3 times when I take them in the Bear Creek drainage now. I always get the same numbers. Let me tell you what February looks like in the Udell Hills. The Udell Hills unit sits in the southeast quarter of the Manistee District, glacial moraine terrain, which means the land moves in ways that are abrupt and not gradual. Sudden ridges, kettle depressions, drainage cuts that arrive without announcement when you're moving through the oak pine upland. In February, the canopy is bare, which means you can see the terrain clearly, and also means the terrain can see you clearly. And I've never been in that country in winter without the specific awareness of my own visibility. You're a dark shape in a white landscape. You are the most visible thing out there. I went in on February 9th for a wind damage assessment after a 2-day blow had come through at 40 to 50 miles per hour. My job was to walk the primary trail corridors, document blowdown that created hazards, GPS any location requiring chainsaw clearance. Standard post-storm work. I'd done it a dozen times in the Udell Hills. I want to tell you one thing before I tell you what I found, and the thing is this. I came to the Manistee District because of my son. Not because of him being there, because of him being gone, specifically a car accident on US 31 in 2013, and the way the field work kept me in a state that required enough of my attention that the grief didn't have space to operate at full volume. I know that's not healthy in a technical sense. I also know it kept me functional for 12 years, and I am not going to apologize for the mechanism that kept me on my feet. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that I was not distracted on February 9th. I was doing what I have done for 12 years, which is keeping myself present in the field, because the field requires presence. And presence was what I had given myself to after Marcus Jr. died, and my presence on that trail was complete. The first wrong thing was the tracks, not the animals' tracks, the absence of animal tracks. The Udell Hills in February carry a continuous record of wildlife movement in the snow. White-tailed deer trails run the ridge contours. Coyote single-file lines cut across the kettle bottoms. Squirrel post holes between the oaks. Ruffed grouse toe drag landings near the brush piles. The snow in the Manistee District is a field report updated continuously by everything that lives in it, and reading it is part of the job. And on the morning of February 9th, the snow in the Udell Hills corridor I was walking was empty. Not disturbed and old. Empty. Fresh snow surface on the trail margins. The overnight powder undisturbed and nothing moving through it. No deer trails, no coyote line, no squirrel post holes. I was 4 miles into a corridor that should have shown me 100 individual animal movement signatures, and the snow was reading like a place where nothing lived. I noted it at 9:12. I attributed it, at that point, to the previous day's wind event. Animals hold in place during high wind, and the post-storm morning can be quiet as the woods resettle. That explanation almost fit. The almost is what I kept working at. The second wrong thing was the smell, and the smell came first as temperature. A warmth in the February air, localized, coming from the northeast, the direction of the largest kettle depression in that section of the unit, a bowl 40 meters wide and 12 meters deep, the northeast wall steep and sheltered from wind, the bottom standing water, most seasons, ice now. I was on the trail above the rim of the kettle when the warmth arrived, and warmth at 15 feet above the floor of a north-facing ice-bottom depression in February has no thermal source I was able to identify, and I stood on the rim and I identified one. The smell was wet canid, dense, worked muscle canid odor, the smell of a large dog that has been running, and then beneath that, the mineral cold stone smell. And the combination arrived as a unit, as a signature, and my body responded to it before my brain had finished categorizing it. I'm talking about the hair on my forearms, both arms, under my jacket. I'm talking about my shoulders coming up involuntarily, in the posture that a shoulder assumes when the body has made a threat assessment that it hasn't briefed the conscious mind on yet. I've read enough behavioral neuroscience to know what that posture means when it arrives without intention. It means the body has already decided. I looked into the kettle. The tracks began at the ice surface and exited the northeast wall via a route that went straight up a 40-degree slope in 22-inch strides. I am going to say that again. 22-inch strides, uphill, on a 40-degree slope. I measured the stride on the ice where it was cleanest. I measured it 4 times. The measurement did not change. 22 inches between bipedal foot impressions going uphill on a near vertical face, which is a stride inconsistent with any bipedal organism I have a reference category for. The foot impression, 14.5 inches. The depth in the wet snow on the ice. I carry a probe for snow depth assessment, and I used it. 1 1/8 inch compression in a snow layer that my own boot, stepping hard, compressed to 3/8 of an inch. I weigh 198 pounds. The math is straightforward. I have done it. I have not written it anywhere, except in a personal journal that stays locked in my truck. I took 16 photographs with my issued camera. The photographs are in the district evidence file. I was told they were inconclusive. I was told the tracks were consistent with a large black bear moving in abnormal posture due to the post-storm disorientation. I have seen black bears in abnormal posture. I know what that looks like. The person who told me that has never spent a February in the Udell Hills. The tracks exited the kettle northeast, and I did not follow them. What I did was stand on the rim for what I believe was 4 or 5 minutes, long enough for the cold to work through my jacket in the way cold works through you when you stop generating heat. And then I walked my remaining trail segment and documented the blowdown and filed my assessment form at 16:40 and drove to the district office. 2 nights later, I was back in the office late, pulling archived incident reports. I have access to all district incident documentation going back to the Forest Service's record system in the 1980s. I was looking for prior anomalous track reports in the Udell Hills unit because pattern is data, and I was trying to be professional about what I'd found. I found 4 prior reports: 1988, 1994, 2003, 2011. Different rangers, different seasons, different locations within the same unit. All 4 described bipedal tracks in the 14 to 16 inch range with stride lengths inconsistent with human locomotion. All 4 were closed as inconclusive. 3 of the 4 were filed by rangers who are no longer with the district. The 4th was filed by a ranger named Paulette Okonkwo, who retired in 2019 after 20 years in the Manistee, and who I called the following week. She listened to what I described. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Udell Hills, Northeast Kettle." She didn't say it as a question. I asked her what she'd seen in 2011. She told me. I'm not going to relay what she told me because it was her account and not mine, but I will tell you that the word she used to describe the vocalization was pressure, and that when she said it, I understood immediately what she meant, and also understood why she'd never fully described it in her official report. She said she'd talked to an Odawa elder in Petoskey after she filed her report. She said he listened to her description and nodded and asked her which drainage, and when she told him, he said the Odawa have a word for the territory around the Udell Hills kettle country. He told her the word. He told her what it meant. I asked her what it meant. She said, "The part of the forest that owns itself." I think about that phrase often. I think about it when I'm writing trail reports for the Udell Hills corridor, and I'm making the patrol schedule and deciding which seasonal rangers I'm going to pair and which routes I'm going to assign them. I think about the kettle. I think about the northeast wall and the 22-inch uphill strides and the warm air that had no source in a February depression. I give that kettle to what owns it. Marcus Jr. would have been 31 this year. I don't know why that keeps occurring to me when I think about the Udell Hills. I don't know what the connection is, only that it's there, whatever it is, and that the field keeps asking me to carry things, and I've always found a way to carry them. This one I carry differently.